Hello and welcome to Objective Health. I am your host, Doug, and with me are my co hosts, Elliot and Erica.
Hello.
And in the background on the Wheels of Steel, as usual, the one and only Damien.
Hello.
So today we are going to be talking about diet dogmatism. And this kind of came up because we were talking about. I'm a member of a couple of different carnivore groups and other different types of groups on Facebook, and I had noticed that there seems to be kind of a dogmatic edge coming into the carnivore community. Maybe it isn't coming in, maybe it's been there for a while, but it just seemed like what really struck me is that a lot of these. I'll tell a story. Basically, there was somebody who posted a picture of they had gone to a kebab shop and they got a whole container full of just meat, but the meat had some sauce on it. And the person was posting, going, "Oh, look at this! I got this. It's all meat, so I can eat out at this restaurant and stuff." And the number of comments on there, just bashing this guy for putting sauce on it. And, a number of the comments on there too were kind of like, guys, take it easy. Like, it's still, that is like a 99% meat meal. It still was like, there's an edge to it where people are they're ready to attack anybody who kind of deviates a little bit from the rules. So I was just thinking these people sound like vegans, basically. And that kind of led us into a conversation, and we were starting to kind of talk about diet dogmatism, which is what kind of led us to this show. But to start things off, I think we've got a little bit of a PSA from JP Sears that we wanted to play first.
I advise everyone to eat the same diet. My nutritional philosophy is the perfect fit for all people because all people are the same. And when someone accidentally gets healthy eating a different diet than what I recommend, they're just wrong. What do indigenous Eskimos from Alaska who eat mostly whale and caribou meat have in common with indigenous Peruvians who eat mostly plants? Everything. They're exactly the same. Their natural environments are just wrong for supplying them with different foods. That's what they have in common. You know how all animals in nature basically eat the same thing? Yeah, it's natural. And that's what people should do. We should all eat according to what our unique body needs? Really? I think that's highly unlikely, highly illogical, a little bit offensive, and highly not good for my business of selling one diet plan to all people.
JP's always got a good take on those kinds of things. But yeah, I think that's kind of the point. It seems like it's like these diets kind of get constructed around these rules, and anybody who kind of deviates from those rules is considered like a heretic, essentially. You're disobeying the rules. It's almost like the dietary dogma has been set down as like the word of God, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not, etc. And anybody who kind of is, it just kind of goes so counter to what it seems like we should be doing with our diets, where you should be kind of experimenting, seeing what works for you. What do you feel good on? What do you not feel good on? And it's just completely counter to the idea that there is a set of dogmatic rules that have to be followed no matter what.
Yeah, indeed. I think, you tend to see this.
I think we lost Elliot.
Did you lose me?
We lost you for a second there.
Oh, sorry.
You tend to see this, and then we lost everything after that.
Yeah, you tend to see this in multiple different groups which follow different diets, and it seems to be fairly common. And something that I've also noticed is it tends to be more pronounced at the extreme ends of the diet spectrum. So the more extreme, the more restrictive, the more kind of, I guess you would say the more restrictive the diet, the more that this tends to rear its ugly head in the idea that people believe that this is, I guess a lot of the time, the reason why someone is going on a highly restrictive diet is because they have the belief that that is necessary for them to become healthy. And in some cases, it might be, right? But then at the same time, when you have these kind of groups of highly restrictive dieters, you also tend to get individuals which I think float towards that. And it seems that there develops kind of like a religious fervor kind of thing that goes on. And people, rather than acknowledging that their dietary choices are beneficial for them and likely can be used as a tool to improve health, it becomes more of an identity thing. So rather than someone kind of just following a diet because they want to become healthy, it rather becomes part of their identity. So they are not someone who follows the diet. They are, the diet is part of how they perceive themselves, how they want to be perceived to others. So an example of this is, for instance, if you go on Instagram, right, and you look at any of the kind of well-known vegan influencers, many of them will often have vegan in their description, right? It's just a very basic example. Vegan is part of their description, and that is how they want to be identified by others. And as part of the veganism, there also comes a variety of other kind of characteristics that other vegans tend to display. And so this is what kind of makes up how they want to be viewed by others, and perhaps how they perceive themselves. And when that happens, it seems as though it's a bit of a rocky road. It's quite dangerous because it can lead to a situation where people can become very rigid in their approach to health, in their approach to supporting others to achieve health. And yet I think it becomes quite unhealthy in many ways.
Yeah.
I also think that psychologically it is a control issue. And I'm speaking from more the vegan, vegetarian experience, like, because I was a vegan years ago and vegetarian, and this whole idea that you're so in control of everything, like just food wise, you know what I mean? And then pushing that on other people and judging and, virtue signaling and all that. Like it becomes, like you were saying, Elliot, it's like this whole identity, but it gets to be just almost neurotic in a crazy sense. Like, and I feel like a lot of that is maybe people just don't have control over other parts of their life. So they feel like, well, if I can control everything I eat and I can have a stance on it, then, maybe have a little bit of personal agency in the world. You know what I mean? But I think that's a slippery slope, because all of a sudden, you're sharing with everyone, and then it becomes kind of egotistical too, like, well, you go to a party and, oh, well, I don't eat that, or, you didn't accommodate my dietary restrictions. You know what I'm saying? So I agree with you both that it's really, it's gotten to the point where, especially on social media, it's just bizarro world. It's like, what is going on? I mean, this is the whole vegan thing with, now they hate on farming, and there was just an article out about Save the Planet by Destroying Farming by, what's his name, George Monbiot. You know what I mean? Jesus. And he wants to eat lab-grown meat, and he wants to be a vegetarian, but he wants to get rid of farming. You know what I mean? And it's like, are you serious? Like, that's your platform? So I don't know. I think it speaks to a lot of people's mental state too. And obviously food affects your mental state. But I think it's just, like I said, it's bizarre world. I don't even know what to think anymore. I just find it entertaining.
I mean, there's people, I think, in any of these groups, and it includes, vegans, carnivores, keto, like paleo, like all, you have these kind of like authoritarian individuals in any of these groups. And I think, different groups maybe have a different ratio of authoritarianism. I would wager a guess that the vegans are probably the highest. But I think that you do have people in all these groups too who are a lot more reasonable, and they are kind of trying to solve health issues or something along those lines, and are kind of making their way, figuring things out. They're like, okay, the carnivore thing seems to be working for me for now, but they might want to introduce some plants at some point, maybe some fruit or something. I've seen some people who talk about they'll eat berries when they're in season and stuff like that. So I think it does, we don't want to paint it as if you belong to, if you're adhering to a diet, you're dogmatic, because I don't think that that's true. It just seems to be that there is this kind of element, and it is, I think, a wider aspect of human psychology. That there are people out there who do, when they get enthusiastic about something or just are interested in something, it does kind of become a part of the identity. And you especially see like the uglier side of it when it's like they form a group, right? So it's like, I'm a vegan and this person's a vegan, therefore we're like brothers, we're like fellow acolytes, we're vegans together. And if anybody ends up leaving one of those groups, that's when you really see the ugliness of it. All the smears, all the, you were never really vegan, blah, 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 blah. Oh, you failed on the diet because you were doing it wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Like it is almost like a religious cult kind of thing where it's kind of like you're no longer one of us. Therefore, I hate you now. You're dead to me. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And in many cases that kind of, I guess that dynamic that goes on is understood by many as kind of the darker sides of veganism, or something that typically shows up in these vegan kind of communities, but it doesn't serve people well for us to define it in that way. To refer, I often see people kind of in conversation will say, well, the way that they are referring to this kind of thing is, I'll stop being like a vegan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whereas by doing that, it's very much opening up the possibility of missing it in ourselves and missing other forms of it if it's not related to that particular topic, in this case, veganism. Essentially, I think that really touched upon the kind of main point here, is that it's tapping into a very kind of primal aspect of human psychology. Mm-hmm. Right. And it probably goes way beyond our cognitive abilities, but rather, have you lost me?
Mm-mm. No, you're still there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought my connection went. Yeah. I think it's on a much more primitive kind of base level, probably related to the primitive parts of our brains kind of thing. And it's like human beings tend toward tribalism, mm-hmm. right? And this can divide us essentially in any aspect of kind of life, especially these days. So there's so many kind of polarizing factors, and it can be your religious views, it can be your political views, it can be your views on any given topic. And in this case, it applies just the same to diet and nutrition. Mm-hmm. And that actually, when we fall into these tribal groups kind of thing, it can very much help to dehumanize anyone who doesn't fit into that group. Yeah. And at the same time, it produces strange kind of, I guess you would say, kind of hierarchical dynamics or weird dynamics that go inside the group. And it can really affect how we perceive, one, what we're doing, and in relation to the diet, so what we're eating. It can force people to kind of become very rigid in the way that they view things. And I think, although I don't know if it would technically fall under the definition of an ideology, but I guess in many respects, it can be likened to a kind of ideology, in that people view the world through a particular lens, and everything that they see can be explained through that lens. So in the context of health, any health condition or any kind of improvement in health or worsening in health can be viewed through the lens of that particular dietary ideology, and therefore all solutions provided kind of for said problem are based on that dietary ideology, if that makes sense. And let me give you examples. So, for instance, someone is fruitarian, and the way that they kind of perceive health is that human beings are fundamentally designed to only ingest fruit. And if they ingest anything else, they become acidic and they become unhealthy. So therefore, they are perceiving everything through that kind of lens, whether it's based on a bunch of false information or not. And then if you go into these kind of weird fruitarian groups, then what you'll see is that when someone is displaying some kind of health problem, people will tell them that it's simply because they are not eating enough fruit, or they have not done enough juicing, or they are still detoxifying animal products.
Yeah.
Right. But then on the other side of the spectrum, in the carnivore groups, someone displays with a genuine health concern, and yet they are met with the same kind of thing. People viewing it through the lens of that human beings are only designed to eat meat, and therefore it's because the person is experiencing the health problems simply because they added a condiment to their meat, or they're not eating enough fat, or they're not eating enough meat, or they should only be drinking water and not, lemon water, or something absolutely silly like that. Point that I'm trying to get across, I hope that this makes sense. The point I'm fundamentally trying to get across is that when we become married or wedded to these kind of ideological ways of viewing things, these rigid, almost religious ways of viewing our diet and our health, then we can potentially be doing a disservice to other people and ourselves.
Yeah.
That, we're not acknowledging the truth of this situation, that people are different and there is not kind of one size that fits all.
Mm-hmm. I see that in the carnivore groups, especially their approach to supplementation. They're really against. They firmly 100% believe that everything you could ever need will come from meat. And I think that at one time on the planet that probably was true. Obviously there are cultures that only ate meat and they got everything they needed from their meat. But the idea that you should not try to solve any of your problems with supplements, or even medications to a certain point, I think that there are always situations that will call for these sorts of things, and to have somebody who is doing fine on the carnivore diet and cruising along, they've never had any kind of issues, telling other people who are clearly having issues that they should not do supplements, that they should not go see a doctor, that they should not do this, should not do that, is, dangerous for one thing. But it's so rigid and so dogmatic that I think that, essentially they're going to be turning people away, because people are going to take a look at them and they're going to be like, oh, these guys are just meat the same thing, only a different diet.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. And it's not just those are two very extremes, like two opposite ends of the spectrum. And it seems to be that, okay, there's a lot of rigid kind of mindsets that develop in any kind of dietary template. As it happens, the more restrictive tends to be the more kind of religious, it seems. Mm-hmm. But actually you have kind of in the keto world as well, and if someone is not responding well to a ketogenic diet, then it's simply because they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right. They must be cheating on the diet. There are clinics who treat people with this kind of diet, and if someone does not respond the way that they want them to respond, then they will be told the patient will be told that they've been doing it incorrectly because their body should have responded differently. And so what it seems like is that people are missing out, or are potentially being given advice which is damaging their health, or they are following advice at the detriment to themselves, simply because they are, I guess, wedded to this mindset,
it's a dangerous situation too, because a lot of cases people are coming to these kinds of extremes because they are desperate. They need help. They're not, their health is not good. And they will look and see other people who are apparently doing very well on these diets. So they try to emulate that kind of thing. And when they don't see the kind of results, not only are they, really what's the word I'm looking for? Well, disheartened, I guess, themselves. But, you know, a lot of times it seems like there's a lot of resistance too when they will post and say, hey, listen, I'm having some problems here. What do you think? And a lot of times they'll get flack from other people, because anybody who fails on that diet, that's a strike against the diet, which they have completely identified with. So if anything that would slightly suggest that their diet isn't perfect, that it isn't for everyone, is met with hostility, essentially.
Yeah. It's a very difficult kind of situation to witness. And it's important to kind of identify it in ourselves as well. It's like this tendency toward tribalism. It's like it's present in all human beings. I mean, it can manifest in some really horrible ways, right? Some terrible ways if you look throughout history. And it's like, I guess in every aspect of our life, it's important to try to identify where we are falling into these kind of rigid views. These polarizing, we're becoming kind of hostage to these polarizing factors, and always trying to kind of reassess where we are, where we stand on something, and try to remain relatively, I won't say impartial, because it's good to be opinionated about certain things, but ultimately not to fall into these rigid mindsets. And I think, you know, I've been wondering about what is kind of the fundamental reason why human beings do this, why it's so easy for us to fall into these kind of rigid ideologies, I guess. And it's a really complicated question. I mean, I think Jordan Peterson would be able to explain it in just the best way, but I think to some extent it's comfortable, right? It's trying to find certainty in an uncertain world. When there is so much that is uncertain, especially if someone has some real bad health condition, and they are searching for answers. You know, these kind of, I guess you would say,
ideologies.
Yeah, these ideologies essentially are attractive. They're attractive because they tick all the boxes. They can provide a solution for all of the problems. When you kind of adopt that way of looking at things, it can explain all of the problems. It can explain why you feel the way that you feel, kind of thing. And there's no room for uncertainty. It can explain, you know, for instance, I guess the carnivore movement, the reason why I keep bringing this one up is because it seems to be kind of really gaining traction at the moment. But there's many of the proponents which will have people believe that it is the one and only way, because it is the one and only diet that human beings are designed to eat. And when you hear that, I mean, that is a very attractive thing, right? And it's like, okay, it makes loads of sense. But unfortunately, in the real world, it doesn't tend to work like that.
Yeah,
it's complex and it's nuanced, and people respond in different ways. And I guess that is uncomfortable. That's chaos. That's it's uncertainty, and I guess human beings tend to shy away from that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you have a very good point there. It reminded me actually when you were talking that, you know, I was thinking like we all have to kind of be like the ideal scientist, which, you know, I think even most scientists don't actually adhere to this very well, but not to remain wedded to any theory, any hypothesis, any idea. You know, the idea of science is that it will always remain open. There is no such thing as settled science. It's like any theory that you have has to always be, you have to be ready to throw it away if contradictory evidence comes along. And we have to kind of maintain that ourselves with our diets, with our political opinions, with everything. You know, you can't be completely wedded to any one thing, because the truth isn't going to be in any one thing. I don't think we have the ability to actually perceive the truth as it is. So we always can get closer, but only if we don't get completely identified with where we are right now. And I think in the diet, it's the same kind of thing. You've got to kind of maintain an open mind, be open to new information, see how other people are doing it. If they're doing it differently, that doesn't mean they're out of the group. That means, well, let's see. Let's see how they do.
It's really that idea that every body is different. And what works for you or Elliot may not work for me, and to be open to that possibility instead of holding this belief system that's going to continue to drive you down this road that may result in your negative health. I mean, I'll never forget reading the book by Leah Keith, The Vegetarian Myth. I mean, I was a vegetarian. I read that book. After that, I was no longer a vegetarian. You know what I mean? It was one of those kind of real eye-opening aspects of learning something and then actually applying the knowledge to your life and being like, well, everybody I know is a vegetarian, all my friends, what are they going to think? And well, it wasn't working out. So it's like, let's try a new strategy. Let's try a new experiment. Let's see how this works. And, again, everyone's different.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else we wanted to talk about on that topic? I feel like we.
No, I think people should really, observe their own ways that they feel. And, we've talked in the past about having a journal, a food journal, and what doesn't make you feel well and what does, and try and stay off the social media stuff about like, maybe I should, because I really see this with the vegan thing now. It's just so like, it's just everywhere. And you're like, gosh, this hasn't died yet. I mean, I feel like we were doing shows about a year ago about this, and it's still, it's almost like, a new movie comes out or some new thing, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, well, maybe we should be plant-based. And it just keeps circling around again and again. And, that doesn't mean things have gotten better. It just means it's coming around again to try and swoop more people up in the process. I don't know.
No, maybe. I have to give credit to Sean Baker. I saw a tweet from him. At least I'm almost positive I saw it from him. Although I was looking for it today before the show and I couldn't actually find it. But he said something along the lines of, like, guys, take it easy. Stop trying to call out people who aren't doing carnivore the way that you think it should be done. He's like, if somebody is eating like 80% meat, they're there. Okay, so just drop it. They're with us. Stop yelling at people for putting a little bit of ketchup on their steak or something. Anyway, I think that's our show for this week. Thanks very much for joining us, everybody. Thanks to the hosts. Thanks to Damien. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. We do one of these every week. And share the video too, if you feel so inclined. And we will talk to you next week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.